Hello, Heiko. Now I start to introduce you and you can start to share your screen, okay? But I introduce you in Chinese so that people really get.
That's fine.
Okay. So Heiko Visarius 博士呢，他是生物工程学博士 ，MBA 有20年以上医疗器械创新及市场拓展的经验，曾就职于包括强生和美敦力在内的跨国公司，并担任欧洲营销的总监、新兴市场事务业务总监等重要职位。他是瑞士知名的创新创业导师，积极的为瑞士医疗器械产业贡献着力量，也是瑞士医疗器械协会的重要联络人。Okay, Heiko, I'm done with you. So now the stage is yours. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to talk about innovation and some things to consider when putting innovation into reality. So why do we innovate? One reason that we see particularly in the Asian markets is, of course, aging societies. So in order to address the well-being of all people who are getting older and want to be active, we need innovation. Just a girl born today in Japan has 50% chance of becoming 100 years old. And innovation will help us to deal with the rising costs. For big companies, it's not so easy to innovate. So also big companies are very much dependent on young and innovative startups with good ideas to make it into the market. And we will now talk about a little bit what they can do. Org charts of big companies are usually looking like that. So it's much easier for managers in big companies not to be innovative, but rather to wait until an innovative young company appears and is successful in the market. That then leads to the fact that companies like Medtronic and all other big players as well tend to then purchase and acquire these young companies just because the young companies are faster in the development, and it's easier for the established companies, given the money they have, to purchase companies and then use their distribution power. This is particularly true for novel business concepts that you are all familiar with. To bring these novel concepts into the market, it's usually easier for young companies to do that. So what I usually see that startups bring, it's the idea, it's including the technology, it's the individuals, the people, and ideally some IP, so that the idea can also be protected. That is usually something that investors are looking for, maybe some initial money from the government, from the university, something like that. On the contrary, there's still a lot missing, and startups and young companies need to figure out a way to address all the topics that I've listed here on the right side. So how exactly are they doing with the regulatory affairs, which is in medical technology absolutely crucial? How do they want to bring their technology to the market, etc. And then it's also the question, how do they want to do the clinical trials, which are often mandatory to achieve the regulatory approval, and how are they going to do the manufacturing according to medical device standards? How do they address marketing? Particularly, how do they build their network of key opinion leaders, KOLs, number 13. And then, of course, number 14, that is the question on who is going to pay and how are their devices reimbursed. Very important for you to figure this out. How does your device, how does your technology fit into existing reimbursement schemes in the various countries? If we try to analyze why young companies are not successful in the medical device area, you will see that the first top two reasons are having to do with the market needs. So the startups are not very good in understanding what it really is that the healthcare professionals are willing to pay money for, or the healthcare system is willing to pay money for, which then leads to a delay, and that's associated with running out of cash. Third reason, we also see it very often, is you just don't have the right team. You need a team that's initially very strong, potentially on the technical and development side, but then you need a team that is very strong on the commercial side. So I call it usually the 3I opportunity. So the 3 I's summarized from what I said before: bring an innovation, bring IP, and bring the right individuals into this company. At the same time, there are 3 things that you absolutely need to consider. They also start with an I, it's also 3I. It's investors, so looking for enough money to pay you all the way to market access, etc. It's the industrialization, so how do you manage to scale up industrial production, etc. And then, as it was just announced as well, how do you sell in international markets outside of your home country? This is also the topic of this entire meeting today. If we look at where do investors spend their money, this is a slide that gives you some hints. It's got to be the right team. You want to really show that you have traction in the market, validated by customers, not just by yourself, but by real customers who could buy your product. Have a strong go-to-market thesis, and of course also have the right timing. A quick word on strategics. So in medtech, there's many big companies, and the advantage of the big companies is usually that they have a very strong and professional distribution worldwide. So at some point, for all younger companies, it's interesting and often crucial to find a way to work with these strategics. And here, in my experience, I see an imbalance between the small player and the big player. So the small player is usually much more agile, much faster, very dedicated, and usually comes with a solid technical background. That's what we see a lot here with young players. Whereas the big player, as said, has the marketing power to also facilitate a global distribution and understands very well the customer-facing processes, also things like support, customer service, etc., etc. And when I see conversations between young companies that want to bring an idea into the market and the big players, these are some of the discrepancies that I typically see, meaning the company says, hey, I have a product. The big player says, no, you don't have a product. You have an idea that maybe one fine day will be a product. Also, very early on, young companies have ideas of what's the value of their company, which for big players is not so important. And yes, having CE is to sell in the European markets is the minimum you have to have, but then there's a lot of other things around it. And then maybe point number 5, some people believe, or some young companies believe, that the invention is so great that the patients will pay for it. That's rarely the case. If you look at your own experience, I mean, in Europe, it's very unusual that the patient pays directly for real medtech or health services or products. One thing I recommend you look into, and Vivian will address this at some point, is the regulatory part. So here you most likely will need support. It's complicated to bring the product really into the market. And then you need to see that you find the right kind of financial support in the stage where you're at. As you can see here in the middle, we have this valley of death. It's usually quite easy to get some initial funding from the university, from the government, etc., etc. But then comes a tough phase when you have to finance this path to the market until you can finally start selling your product. And that's where you have to convince some savvy investors who will then finance that. So coming back to this, that we said before, make sure you understand the key performance indicators that really drive your business. That's something absolutely crucial. How many to sell one product, how many demos do you need to do? How many qualified customers do you need to have? And how many people need to know that you exist on the awareness level? Same as, for example, understand the sales process really by key opinion leaders, by KPIs, that you really know, okay, if I invest so much marketing money, this will really result in so many qualified customers, so many demos, and so many sales, and so much in terms of revenue. Coming to the finish, this is a slide or a scheme I use a lot. It lists for you the 5 key stakeholders that you need to convince in medical technology. I made it jive, so it all starts with a P. It's the doctor, the physician, it's the patient, it's the hospital, the provider, it's the health insurance, the payer, and it's the policy maker. And for each one of these, you need to determine what is really the pain point that you're addressing, what is the promise that your company is providing, and how can you prove that it's really going to happen. So that's for you to fill out these 15 fields to have a basis of stakeholder management that you will need. I finish with a few examples. This company from Zurich, Switzerland, solves the issue of measuring the oxygen level in early born babies. There's today no solution for that, to measure it directly in the brain. So this is a good example on how a pain point that clinicians and parents have, meaning to see how well the little baby is doing, can be solved with modern technology and is then also paid by the health insurances, as we could see with this company. Another example is dealing, for example, with the efficiency in hospitals, in this case, the AI-based analysis of mammography images, also a Swiss startup, which is accelerating tremendously the speed with which these mammographies can be analyzed. And that allows the hospital to see, let's say, 6 patients instead of 4 patients in a morning. And that means also better utilization of what they're having in terms of infrastructure. Some other examples in digital health, I'm not going to go into detail. Certainly a trend that you want to consider. A big question here is usually, how is this paid for? How is this monetized? Here an example from Israel that turns the voice of people with speech impairments into clear voice, clearly addressing a medical need. Extremely successful startup from there with a worldwide launch. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this gave you some food for thought and some good ideas on what to consider when bringing your idea from the early stages into clinical realities. I look forward to your questions and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Heiko, for your nice presentation. I just saw from our live studio now, there are already 654 people are watching our live stream from China. Really great, and thank you so much for your experience sharing. Here is a question on you, Heiko. We know, and as you have already addressed or introduced, there are so many hurdles for innovative startups to translate their ideas into clinical applications and later to launch their products. As a startup coach, And what do you think, or what have you heard from the startup about their concern of MDR, EU MDR regulatory changes on medical device innovation in general in Europe? Would this regulatory policy negatively affect the process of medical device innovation in Europe?
Yeah, this is a very excellent question. Indeed, we now have a few years of the MDR in place, and my experience is also that it slows down innovation because the hurdles to really go into commercial reality, to go into the market, got higher. This is particularly pertaining to software, which was not regulated much at all with the previous regulation. And now there are a lot more rules also concerning software, also regarding the clinical trials needed. This has become more stringent. So my advice for these young companies is two things. Number one is make sure you talk to an expert who knows this very, very well, for example, Eric, and make sure you work with a company that has experience with that. And number two, make sure that the additional money and the additional time is properly reflected in your roadmap.